Everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As our participants are joining, we'll be getting started shortly. Um, Thank you again for coming out to our financial resources webinar. We'll be starting momentarily. It looks like we have quite a few participants who have joined us, so we'll get started. My name is Diana Singh. I'm the Business Innovation Coordinator for the Office of Economic Development. We're so glad that all of you have been able to join us today to learn more about the financial resources that are available to your business. Part of the reason we organized this webinar is that we wanted to give you an understanding of those resources and an opportunity to ask some questions from local experts. We're so happy today that we have Mark Perriello from the Kauai Chamber of Commerce joining us. We have Sean Cayley from Kauai Government Employees Federal Credit Union. We have Mary Dale from the Small Business Administration and Dana Halanio from the Minority Business Development Agency. We're going to give you today an overview of the Paycheck Protection Program, also known as PPP, the Targeted Idle Program, the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, and let you know how to apply and answer your questions about those programs. So to get it started today, I'm going to turn it over to Mark to just share some words of welcome.
Thank you, Diana. Always a pleasure to work with Diana at the Office of Economic Development. If folks don't know Diana yet, you're going to at some point because she is just a real powerhouse within the county government, doing so much to help support our small businesses right now. And just very grateful for all your work and your wisdom and your thoughtful questions. Just a really great partner with the Chamber, along with the entire team at OED. So from the Chamber's perspective, I would just want to say that if you are struggling right now to make it through this pandemic and your business is struggling, these resources are available to you, and I would encourage you to utilize them. When the first round of PPP went through, there was a lot of controversy, for lack of a better word, about whether people should take the money, not take the money, whether it was forgivable, not forgivable. All of those things we're going to learn about today through our experts at SBA. And the truth of the matter is that if your choice is between closing your business and utilizing one of these great programs that the federal government has made available, I really would encourage you to do that. And so the Chamber is in a unique position because not only are we here to help encourage participation in these programs if it's needed, we're also a customer. We just got approved for our PPP loan yesterday or 2 days ago. And so are very grateful for that. It's something we think is very timely as the Chamber struggles through this like everyone else. And so just really grateful to both of our experts, Mary and Dana, today, and looking forward to hearing from them. And again, Diana, thank you for everything that you do for our community.
Obviously, I think all of you already know Mark and the amazing work that he and his team have been doing at the Kauai Chamber. They really have been instrumental in our economic recovery over the past year in supporting our local businesses and providing resources and training. So thank you, Mark, for joining today. Thank you for sharing your experience with applying for PPP and for all that you do and continue to do. We really value your role here in our county.
Thank you.
As we go through our presentation today, for all of those who are joining us, I want to do just a quick overview of what you'll be learning about and the structure for today's event. We will start with a presentation about the Paycheck Protection Program and Targeted Idle Program. Next, we'll talk about the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. And then we'll hear a perspective from a local lender about the application process and some tips and recommendations. We know that many of you have questions, and I'd like to ask that if at all possible, please hold your questions until the Q&A session at the end. And at that point, we'll allow you to add that into the Q&A chat feature at the bottom. We want to give as much opportunity to cover the basics first, and then dive deeper into your questions after. So let's start with Mary Dale. Mary Dale is the Economic Development Specialist with the Small Business Administration. She knows all things PPP and has very graciously and generously agreed to join us today to make sure that you also have an understanding of those programs that are available. So with that, Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Diana. I don't know all things PPP as of today, because it could change tomorrow. So I just want to, quickly, flip through a couple of the screens because it's information that is currently passed by us, because some of the dates that we have, they've already opened up PPP. So if we skip the screen, a couple of shots, that'll be great. So we're going to be covering on the agenda today, first folks that received, that did not receive a first draw, and maybe looking at a second draw, but we're going to cover some of those with PPP. Firstly, after January 19th, everything was opened up for first and second draw. So that's kind of where we are now. Just a reminder to all of you that have not applied as of yet, that March 31st is the end of the day to have your PPP loan application submitted. So you want to get that taken care of before the deadline. Or before the funds run out. And currently, right now, we're in no trouble of those running out. So I know a lot of you are kind of panicked about that, thinking I got to go right this second. But we want to get you prepared if you are looking to apply for PPP. Next slide. So for those of you that have not applied at all for the, as of August 9th, you never applied for a PPP, you will apply under the first draw loan program. So that means you have to look at the application that lists, the first draw, and it'll be on the website of the lender that you choose to work with. Now, in order to be eligible for the first draw, you could not have received the loan prior to the August 9th day, 2020. And also there have been some additional entities that will be added, and then we'll go over that shortly. The covered period to be eligible has been expanded. So if you are familiar with the Paycheck Protection Program, you'll remember you had an option on the first go around from either 8 or 24 weeks. But this one allows the borrower to select what your time frame will be anywhere from that 8 to 24 weeks. So you can select 8 weeks, you can select 15 weeks, 17, anything up until the 24 weeks. And then once you do choose that covered period, as we call it, then you would have 10 months from the time you utilize those funds to apply for the forgiveness process. So we'll also discuss how certain folks that may have applied early on for the PPP may look for increases to that loan because they weren't eligible when they originally came out. So next slide. So the new entities that have been added are listed on here: housing cooperatives, destination marketing organizations, and 501c6s. Now, Mark just said the chamber was able to get PPP loan this go around because they originally didn't qualify under the old eligibility. So great that they were able to get that this time around. And at least we know those entities are applying. So that was good information to hear from Mark today. Certain eligible news organizations are also eligible. And remember, with all of this, if you're under the PPP, the first draw, your number of employees has to be less than that 500. And then we have your regular entities that applied before. They're all eligible this go around as well. The next slide. Oh, they like this slide on. Okay, they want to leave it on this slide, so I just start talking about stuff anyway. Okay, so for the second draw PPP loan, and maybe I should cover a couple of other things that I didn't mention on the first draw. As a first draw, originally the loan was set up for 2 or 5 years if it became a loan. For this to go around, for the first draw, it's only 5 years for the loan at 1%. And that only applies if your loan is not fully forgiven and the portion of it turns into a loan. So part of how you have to use the funding under the second and the first draw, at minimum, you have to use at least 60% of your funding under your payroll costs. And that would be your anything for payroll includes, your insurance, your employees' salaries, those kind of things. And then there are non-payroll costs. But in order to qualify under the second draw, you have to obviously have previously gotten a first PPP loan before the August 9th date and have expended all of those funds before you can get new funds under the second draw. You do not have to have didn't have your loan forgiven yet, but you have to have utilized all of those funds before you can get new funds under the second draw just dispersed to you. You can apply and even be approved, but you won't get any new funding until all those funds have been used up. The other more important thing is that you have to show that your business has suffered at least 25% in reduction of gross receipts. And in order to do that, you need to determine which quarter that happened in. And how you go about doing that, as you look for your 2019, where you received the first funding that you brought in your tax returns for, and it was based on the loan that you received, you need to look, okay, the third quarter, I got $30,000. And now in 2020 that just passed, in the third quarter, I made only $10,000. As long as you can show that there's been at least a 25% reduction in gross receipt, you would qualify to apply for the second draw PPP. The other thing you're going to do that's a little different than it was in the first go round, you're going to have to determine, how much funding you get based on some other things. So once you tally up your gross receipts and figure out, okay, for the year I made $120,000. And then from that, you divide that by the 12 months. You're going to come up with $10,000. And that's your monthly payroll. So once you figure that out, you got to say, okay, now where do I fall according to my NEX code, which is the North American Industrial Classification System. That NEX code determines what type of business you have. And if you have a business that falls in the food industry and it has a NEX code of 72, then you're going to determine that, okay, I get 3.5 times that $10,000 times the 3.5. If I fall in any other qualifying industry, I only get 2.5. And that gives you the loan amount that you would qualify for. So I hope that makes some kind of sense. If it doesn't, we can, when we get to the end, like Diana said, we can try to answer those questions. And if it doesn't work after that, we'll have to have a one-on-one. But there also, make sure when you're applying for the second draw that you get the correct application, the one that says the 2483 SD, meaning second draw, as opposed to the first draw. So you want to make sure you have the right application when applying, because the first draw loan is going to be solely based on the 2.5, and the second draw could possibly be based on the 2.5 or the 3.5, depending on your industry. Next slide. So also the eligibility loan has been kind of enhanced, so to speak, for what you can use the funding for. Originally, you could get payroll on one side of the house with that 60% minimum, or you can get non-payroll, which would include your rent, your utilities, and mortgage interest. But the non-payroll side has been increased to add a few more components to it. So if you're looking to purchase, software or cloud computing equipment that will allow you to upgrade your systems for human resources, accounting needs, and other things that'll help you in your administrative side of the house, you can purchase it with that. You can also use it for supplier payments that were in place prior to that February 15th date. So if you're already purchasing goods from a supplier and you had a contract with them to make those debt payments, if it was in place before the February 15th, 2020, you can use that non-payroll calls for that as well. And also now on the payroll side, you can add your group insurance and disability. And that would also include your workman's comp for that, the unemployment insurance to pay that. You can pay state and local taxes, but not federal with that. So under here, I mentioned earlier for the first draw, you have to have under that 500 employees. For the second, you're only allowed to have 300 or less employees to qualify. So the things you need to know is that you have to have that 25% reduction of gross receipts. You have to have less than the 300 employees, and you obviously have to have gotten a first draw PPP in order to be eligible for the first draw. The second draw. Next slide. So part of the issue that we ran into with some of the loans when it came to the forgiveness process, that there were borrowers who had applied for the EIDL program and they received what we call the EIDL advance. And originally that EIDL advance was set up to be for $10,000, but some of you got as little as maybe $1,000 because you were sole prop and they based it on the number of employees. With that advance, when you put in for your forgiveness on that original loan, you were told that that would reduce your forgiveness process, which it did. So maybe you had a PPP loan that was $10,000, and now you also had this $1,000 grant from SBA for this advance. You got the $10,000 PPP loan forgiven, but that $1,000 was added back into that to reduce that loan. So now you have a $1,000 loan. Well, because of the new legislation that just came out, they corrected that. And your lender will be notified if they haven't already, and they will be getting in touch with you on how they're going to rectify that. So that loan that you thought you would have will be eliminated and you'll be made whole for that. And moving forward with the new loan that you're applying for, there will be no forgiveness reduction if you had idle money, so you don't have to worry about that this go around. Also, some of the changes when it comes to filing your taxes is that it was originally not tax deductible for the PPP loan. So if you purchase things with that, you were going to have be taxed on that. That is no longer the case as well. That has gone away. But you also want to make sure you consult with the IRS when you file this year to see how that plays out. But if you check the irs.gov website, there's a lot of information about it, because I looked a couple days ago, and I guess a lot of people who are filing want to know how that loan is going to be looked at and what things that I originally got, because if you paid the mortgage interest on your with your PPP loan originally, that is something you normally would claim as a deduction. So it originally said you could not take that deduction if you had gotten a PPP loan. Some of those changes have been made, so you want to make sure that that's one that's still eligible for you to file. Also, we're still waiting for the new application that's going to simplify the forgiveness for anyone who has a PPP loan that's under $150,000. There will be a self-certification form that SBA is working on for a borrower to be able to sign off on that. So they're not going to go through the portal for the forgiveness that most loans that are over that dollar amount. There'll be a certification that allows them to say, I use these funds appropriately. This is what I use them for. I'll save my receipts for SBA if they need to audit me within the next 6 years. And I can just sign off on that and have that forgiven to my lender. So they're trying to get that simplified form out. It's not ready as of yet, but hopefully it'll be coming out soon. Next slide. So for those of you who do not have a lender or have not been able to find a lender that will do your PPP loan, maybe it's your first go round, and maybe your bank or credit union of choice is not doing first draws, then you can check the SBA.gov/lender match site. That will find you a lender that is doing PPP. But you have to remember also that SBA, this is a national site. and it will link you up possibly to a mainland lender that can do the PPP. And they would be willing to do it. It's just if you're willing to use a mainland lender. So it doesn't guarantee you that you'll get a local lender. But after this is over, I will definitely get the local lender lists over to Monica so she can send that out if you choose to look at that list first before you go to the national site. Here are all the websites. I have my phone number if you have questions later. Hopefully, Monica's going to give me some other questions, or we're going to cover the ones at the end, and you won't have any questions later for me, but just in case. And then, so we're going to move into the, and you can slip the next slide because I think it just asks us to go to the EIDL. So those of you that may not have qualified or didn't apply for EIDL the first go around, or when you got ready to apply, you realized it was only open at that time for agricultural businesses, and you didn't realize it reopened again for everyone. It's still available, and it has extended the date that you can apply. So now the new date that you have up to apply for the EIDL loan, the 30-year loan, not the EIDL advance, it is till December the 31st of this year. So a few things about the eligibility for that. You've had to have been in business prior to the February 15th date 2020. You have to submit your application. You're going to submit your application to a portal, but you have to have already submitted their application. I'm sorry, it'll be taken on the first served basis, but there's still plenty of funding right now to take those applications. Your business has under that 500 employees, or if it doesn't fit that, then you can find out what your next code and see if it falls into the range of your next code says you're a service business, you make under this certain revenue stream based over a 3-year average. If you fall under that, then you would qualify as well. Agricultural businesses, enterprises are open. Every business is open to apply for this. Nonprofits, faith-based, sole props, independent contractors that are 1099, any of those can apply. There are some that do not qualify businesses that we consider as passive income. So if you just have an apartment building, you collect rent. That's one. If you do speculative, I want to buy a building, fix it up, resell it. Those are some things that SBA does not do. If you have what we call, I don't want to say a pyramid kind of business, but the multi-level marketing, such as like Mary Kay, Amway, those kind of businesses wouldn't qualify either, or any kind of gambling that has more than a certain percentage. So I think it's 30% that your income comes from that. That wouldn't qualify either. Next slide.
Oh, hold on.
You got to do better with the slides.
Jump in for 1 second to let you all know too that we'll be sharing these slides with everyone in attendance. So if you're frantically writing notes and trying to take this in, no need to do that. It will all be sent to you after this presentation as well.
Thanks, Diana, because nobody wants to be taking that many notes, because there's a lot of stuff. So the loan is for 30 years, long time. So it's spread pretty far apart. So your payments are going to be fairly reasonable depending on the dollar amount you get. It's fixed at 3.75 if you're for profit business. If you're a nonprofit, then it's only 2.75. So there's a little difference in there for applying for the EIDL. And you can use this a little bit more liberally than you do with the PPP. You can also use it for payroll, but you can use it for working capital needs as well, pay off leases that were in place during the time. And there's no prepayment penalty. So if you decide I want to pay this off tomorrow because now businesses, it's gotten better, you can do that with no penalty. You also get a year of deferment. So you got 1 year before you have to make any payment. Once you get that money dispersed to you, that year starts to tick. But still, it's accruing interest. So if you choose to do that, you can also pay on that interest or just start paying your loan whenever you choose. Next slide. So you'll see listed on here how to go about getting on the EIDL to apply. It's directly with SBA. So you go on the SBA.gov page under the funding, and you'll see this setup, and you'll be able to click on that to start processing the application. Next slide. Because it's pretty streamlined. So when you put the information in, it'll seem like, it'll take maybe like 10 or so minutes. You're like, wow, that didn't ask me a whole lot of questions. How are they going to figure out, how much funding do I need? So next slide. So some of that, the funding is going to be based on 6 months of working capital. And they may ask, SBA might ask you for some more information that may not be listed if they can't determine from your completed application on how to figure that out. So they're going to determine how much of a loan you get, and then they will send that document to you, and you can decide if that's acceptable for you to receive. So for the payments, I think I already said the deferral for the 1 year online. I'm sorry, 1 year deferment. This is why I don't use PowerPoints, because I get ahead of myself and people are going, what is she talking about? But we'll just ramble on and pretend like I didn't say any of that. So we already said that. And if you decide I'm kind of old school, I don't want to do online payments to pay back my loan, you can contact our disaster center once you get that set up and arrange for mail-in payments for that. Next slide. So here are some of the reasons for decline when it gets to the EIDL. These are not all of them, and some of these can be corrected, and I'll explain when I go through them. So obviously, they're going to look at some of this under your credit history, but that does not mean if you have a lower score than we normally accept that you may not be able to get it done, because we don't know what that score is, but we know it's lower than they normally would look at it because of the situation we're having. So also, not eligible businesses activity, the ones I mentioned earlier, if you fit one of those groups, the multi-level marketing, the passive income kind of thing, you would not be eligible to apply. If you are delinquent more than 60 days on child support, and I always like to emphasize this means men and women who are delinquent on it will not be eligible to apply, because SBA sees that as a conflict, because that's, a federal payment as well. So you have to have that cleared up. If you cannot substantiate that you suffered any injury as far as financially during COVID, maybe your business started doing really well, so you would not qualify as well. If you have a record, a felony or fraud record, it doesn't mean if you have a criminal record, you could not qualify, but if it's a felony when it comes to fraud. So if you got information that was by fraudulent means, you would not qualify for this. If you robbed a bank, you would not qualify for this. So character plays a role in that. The big one that we'll see a lot of folks that are being declined and they can get corrected are the unverifiable information. Like, for example, you might have applied for the loan, everything looked great, and then they went to look to make the deposit and they realized that bank account number is incorrect. They will turn down that loan and they will allow you to come back for reconsideration to apply after you correct that information. We even had a person that applied and they went back and declined them and told them basically they were dead. Well, obviously they knew they weren't dead because they were applying for this loan. But the information that they got showed that up as somebody was similar to the name, because the social security number had the wrong number off. So they had to get that corrected to prove they're still alive, and then they could qualify under reconsideration. So it's things like that. If you ever get one that says you were declined because of unverifiable information, you want to find out from our disaster center what that unverifiable information is so you can correct that. The other, and lastly, and it could be more, but this is the last one. If you applied and it took so long that you didn't hear back from SBA, you stopped looking for the emails or anything, and you had given up, and then they had actually approved you, you have 60 days to accept that approval. And if you let it go by and you missed that and you saw it on the 61st day, then that loan got declined. And so you had to go back to reconsideration to actually get that redone. And so you can apply for that loan. So those are some of the reasons and some of the ways you can correct for a declination that you want to take a look at. So remember, you have 60 days to accept it. And if it's the second time you get declined, you have 30 days to make an appeal. Next slide. So here's the email if you have to go in for reconsideration. So currently we have the loan is maxed at 150. They're trying to make alterations with that. They're waiting for the new administrator to be approved and hopefully change that and put that back to the $2 million limit, but it is not there yet. So if you are looking to have an increase on your loan, if you got less than that 150, you can ask for a reconsideration to have that loan increased if it's less than the 150 currently. If you have the max of 150, you cannot ask for reconsideration until they make that change, if they make that change for the higher dollar amount. So you want to make sure you have your application number and your name on that when you do submit to that email address, so they can know how much you got on the previous loan and if they can justify you getting a new loan with a higher dollar amount. Next slide. So lastly, before we get into the shutter venue, and I'm sure you guys will be glad to hear from Dana and you're trying to probably hear it from me, because these things seem like they're droning on, or I'm just droning on. I'm tired myself out, so I know you're tired. So the new version of the EIDL, last time, it got dropped in your account. You didn't know what it was for. You got that 1,000 or 5,000. You said, thank you. I'm going to go help my business out with this, but I don't know why it showed up. This go around, the EIDL will be targeted. And I see when Lori did this, I realized she misspelled the EIDL program. It should be EIDL. I didn't notice that before. We'll correct that on the next one. But anyway, the EIDL, the targeted EIDL program, SBA will notify you. So if you originally applied for the EIDL advance and you received that $1,000 or that $5,000 based on the number of employees you had, this go around, there's a different criteria. SBA will send you an email. It'll say, hey, we know you got less than that 10,000 that we wanted you to get originally, and you have a chance to make up for that. So you have to, be located in a low-income community, and SBA currently will determine that community based on IRS information. But they are going to be setting up a mapping geo system for you to go in there first to be able to put your physical address and see if you're in that low-income community. Currently, that is not up and running, but don't worry, you can still fill out the information, and SBA will determine that until it gets up and running. Once they determine you are in that, you also have to have shown that there's a decrease in your gross receipts by 30%. And that's based on 8 weeks or 2 months. And once you can that qualifies you, then you can put in for the targeted EIDL. And what that does, let's say you got that $1,000 last time. If you qualify and you're approved, SBA will now give you that $9,000 to make it you hold to that 10,000 that you originally applied for. So you originally got 1,000. The grant was supposed to be for 10,000. Now you're eligible to get $9,000. And that's on the first round of that to get that advance. The second round for the advance, and it's probably on the next page because I don't keep up with, these things. Okay, it is, maybe. All right, so the second go around is if you applied for the EIDL advance and you never received it and you applied before the 27th of December of last year and you never got any money, you still have to meet the same criteria, the low income area. You have to show that 30% reduction, and they'll verify that some of that by sending you a 4506T form for your transcripts to check out what you filed on your tax returns. And then you have to make sure you have less than that 300 employees. then you could qualify to get the full $10,000. So this second round says, hey, I applied for EIDL, I never got anything. Now I'm eligible possibly to get the $10,000 in full. So I hope that makes sense. If not, we'll figure it out later. Next slide. That's what that said. See how ahead of myself were? So we'll see on here. Yeah, take that slide off too, because we already determined those people are not going to help you when we go. So eliminate that. I got it fixed yesterday. We'll give Diana the right names. So just so you know, now you've heard about the new targeted EIDL. You don't have to do nothing. If you're a small business, SBA will contact you directly. And for the PPP, you've heard all of that. And then Monica will get you an information. I'm sorry, Monica. I was looking at Sean and thinking about the credit union. Diana will get you that information. So thank you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Mary. Before we move on to the next part of the presentation, I just want to reiterate that last part, because looking at our list of participants and some that we spoke with previous to this webinar, we know there's a lot of businesses in our community, our smaller businesses, who did receive the EIDL advance for an amount that was less than $10,000. And so it's very important, check your email, make sure, because SBA will be reaching out to you if you are eligible, and that's additional money if you didn't receive the $10,000 originally that could benefit your business right now. So we know everybody's a little wary of email scams and things like that. Make sure to check your email. As you saw in Mary's presentation, it will come from an official government address. But don't be skeptical about it. Ask us if you have questions, but don't pass up that opportunity.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Make sure that it has that .gov email, the SBA.gov, to make sure it's legit.
So now we'll move on. Dana's going to talk to us about the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. And just as a reminder, Sean will also share with us a little bit more too about how to apply for these programs with a local lender. Dana, go ahead.
All right. Aloha, everybody. My name is Dana O'Neill. I'm with the NVIDIA Business Center at the University of Hawaii. And if that wasn't enough information for you to marinate on, I've got a little bit more for you to add on from Mary's slide. So she talked about the PPP and the EIDL. I want to kind of round that out by talking to you about what we call the SVOG, which is the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, which is also included in the act that was passed in December, Economic Aid Act. So the first thing I want to tell you, this slide basically tells it all, is that the application is not open yet. So SBA has not opened up the grant application for you to fill out. There is no ETA as of today as to when that will happen. But the crux of today's discussion is to get you prepared should you be eligible to apply for the SVOG. So one of the things we always make sure everybody understands that because it is a grant, you have to be listed as a federal vendor. Therefore, you must register in what the federal government has, which is called SAM.gov, System Awards Management.gov. So for any entity that is applicable for the SVOG, you must be already active and registered within SAM.gov. And I'll talk about that more later towards the end of the presentation. The Shuttered Venues Operator Grant was approved under the Economic Aid Act, and that particular carve-out was about $15 billion. Of that $15 billion, the federal government set aside $2 billion of those dollars for what we call small business venues. And those small business venues are defined under the act as those shuttered venues that have less than or up to 50 FTEs, so 50 employees. The grants can be awarded up to 10 million. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the supplemental, but there will be an option for a supplemental. So in other words, you may be able to draw or apply again for up to 50% of your first award, which again is at max 10 million. So the maximum amount every eligible applicant or entity can be eligible is about 15 million. So getting a little bit more into the weeds, when the application opens, which of course we don't know when that will open, the first 14 days of the application, the grant application, will be only available to those eligible entities that reported a 90% or greater gross earned revenue loss. The second tranche of funds, which I want to call the second priority, is going to happen after the 14 days for a 14-day period. So the second 14-day period is for our second priority eligible applicants. And it is for those entities that have experienced a 70% or greater gross earned revenue loss. And then after the first and second priority comes in, then we have what's called the third priority, which is the third tranche of applications that can come in. That'll happen 28 days after it launches. So notice there's the first, then the second, then the third priority will open up on the 28th day. And those are for eligible entities that have experienced a 25% or greater gross earned revenue loss. And that's going to be comparing 2019 and 2020 quarters. Once those three tranches are done, if there's any more funds available in the $15 billion pool, then SBA will open up the application process again for what we call the supplemental applications. And those supplemental applications are only for those eligible entities that fit the first and second priority. So again, if you experienced a 90% or greater loss, you're considered first priority. If you experience 70% or greater gross revenue loss, you are considered second. Okay, and then that is, of course, by that deadline, April 1st. Moving forward, so the SVOG, still summarizing the act, grants may be up to 45% of gross revenue earned. Applicants, so eligible entities, must have been in operations as of February 29th, 2020. Applicants must not have received a PPP loan on or after December 27th, 2020. And again, applicants or eligible applicants must show that they have at the very least a 25% or greater reduction in revenues. Okay, so talking a little bit more about the SVOG, I'm always asked, well, what can you use the funds for? So I pulled this, and again, you'll get this PowerPoint slide from Diana, but you can use that link to go into a little bit more detail with regards to what you can and cannot use the funds for. But really quickly, you can use the funds for payroll costs, anything that is contributing to payroll or employees. Payments to independent contractors, I think Mary kind of talked about that, but your max for an independent contractor is $100,000. Mortgage payments, rent payments, again, those are not prepayments now, scheduled P&I payments, utility payments, state and local taxes. I think Mary kind of talked about that already. That does not include federal taxes, debt payments and operating leases, any activity prior to February 15th. And then there's kind of like this big gold miscellaneous bucket called the ordinary and necessary business expenses are also covered in terms of use for the SVOG, the grant funds. So then I was also asked early this morning, well, what can't you use it for? So I didn't update my slides, but really quickly, what you can't use it for is to purchase real estate. This is a grant, so that's kind of like a federal mandate for any grant that you use, which is you can't use it for real estate purchase. You can't use it to make payments on or after February, I should say after February 15th. You can't use federal funds to purchase investments or give out loans using the funds. And long story short, and again, this is a baseline grant mandate for the federal government. You cannot use these funds for any political nature or anything with regards to political nature. So that's kind of the main things I know I want to tell you with regards to use of funds and what you cannot use the funds for. But again, feel free to take a look at the link. It gets into a little bit more of the weeds in terms of what you can use the funds for and what you can't. So what do we say is an eligible applicant? So again, I'm pulling this straight off of the Economic Aid Act. There's the link to it. But long story short, eligible applicants are your live venue operators and promoters, your motion picture theater operators, your live performing art organization operators, museums, aquariums, zoos, your theatrical producers, your talent reps, and to a certain extent, some of the subsidiaries under the above organizations. Now, having said that, there was a recent publication pulled out by SBA under the FAQs, which subsequent slides have the link to, so you can get a little bit more into the weeds in terms of what subsidiaries are included and what subsidiaries may not be eligible. But again, we can talk about that more at the end. So the next question is always, well, how do you calculate the funds? How do you calculate what your eligible funds would be? So the first thing I want to make sure everybody understands is you want to, because the application again is not available yet. But what you should be doing for those that may want to apply for the SVLG is collecting all of your financial documentation, the 2019 as well as your 2020. Because you want to be able to substantiate or justify that you have in fact shown some percentage growth revenue loss between the periods of 2019 or 2020. You also want to put together documentation to justify your FTE status, right? So you want to be able to have that documentation ready to go. And again, I want to make sure I say this, the application is not available yet. Part of the process, or what the message we're wanting to say today is you want to get your documentation ready. So moving forward, the calculation is based on your time of operations. So if you were in operation, if your entity, eligible entity, was in operation as of January the 1st, 2019, then, and for you guys that do taxes a lot, it is the lesser of 45%, sorry, of 2019 gross earned revenue or 10 million. So the lesser of. Now, if your business was in operation after January the 1st of 2019, then the calculation is based on the lesser of an average monthly gross revenue for each full month in operation during the 2019 period at a multiplier of 6. Okay, so depending on when you started your business in 2019 is when you would calculate the eligible funds amount. So the next slide kind of gives an example. So let's say you started your business in 2019 on February the 25th. And here's your monthly gross revenues for that particular period of the year. So like the act says, we discount or we remove all of those partial months. So if we add up your gross revenues from March all the way to December, in this example, you'll see that this particular eligible entity was at 1.878 million. And we took an average of that. So you divide it by 10, which is the full months in operation. And then you divide that by a multiplier of 6. So the maximum eligible amount for the eligible applicant would be no more than 1.1268 million. So that would be an example of how you would calculate the maximum amount of funds under the SVOG application as it stands today. So if I haven't said this enough, let me say this again. This information is as of today. Things change at least 2 times a day, which means this may change by the time I finish this PowerPoint presentation. Okay, moving forward. So you want to kind of take a look at the PPP, the EIDL, as well as the SVOG in terms of determining where you best fit. But this slide is kind of giving you a differentiation between the 3. What Mary said was, long story short, the PPP is primarily used to cover payroll costs. And depending on whether you meet the 60-40 split, it can be 100% forgivable. The EIDL is a loan, which is primarily used to cover working capital. And just kind of to reiterate, the SVOG, you are not prohibited from applying to the SVOG if you already have or a plan to apply for the EIDL. You are not prohibited from the SVOG if you received a first draw prior to December 27th, 2020, which is when the Economic Act got passed. However, entities are prohibited from applying for the grant if you applied for the PPP loan or received the PPP loan proceeds on or after December 27, 2020. Again, when the act was passed. And if your primary business operations are held outside of the United States, you probably will not be eligible for the SVOG. So it is a grant. So unlike the other SBA products, what I normally tell clients is that you want to prepare for the fact that this is a grant. So I always tell clients, you want to start keeping a digital folder of all of your documentation, because do not for a minute think that Mary and her folks at SBA will not come and visit you sometime within the next 3 to 5 years of the grant proceeds being dispersed. That is also included in the act. So keep a sub-file of your 2019 financial information. That includes your summary reports as well as your monthlies. Keep a sub-file of your 2020 financial information. Again, that includes your summary statements as well as your monthly reports. Keep a separate sub-file of the SVOG application that you submitted, as well as any of the narrative, document eligibility, and funds calculation that you did. Keep a separate sub-file for your registration with sam.gov, as well as all of the screenshots that you will be doing to register as a federal vendor. And then and I'll talk about this more later, but the notarized authorization letter that you have to submit to get your sam.gov activated. Okay, so because this is a grant, what you have to do as an eligible applicant and a receiver of the grant funds is that you must register with sam.gov, and I talked about this earlier. But long story short, it is a database. It houses all of the federal vendors and grantees within that .gov system. You should know that the .gov system is free. There is no charge to register for sam.gov. If you get any email, if you go onto a website that does not have .gov, they will probably charge you to register for you. So always look for the sam.gov under your browser. The registration must be renewed every 12 months. You will get a notification that you have to reactivate your registration. That sam.gov registration must be active in order to get your grant. And you have to maintain your information, because let's put it this way. If you get approved for the SVOG, the funds will be dispersed based on the financial information that you give under the sam.gov system. So you want to be able to collect your EFT information now, so your electronic funds transfer. Let your banker know that you're looking for their routing number, even their contact information, because that will be submitted under the sam.gov. That's how the grant funds will be dispersed to you. So you want to be able to maintain that financial information, make it active, make sure it's current. This is a step-by-step process on how to register under sam.gov. I will be very quick. I'll go through these slides really quickly, because what we'd like to do is reach out to Diana within the next week or so, because Mary and I will put out a separate webinar just to go through the process of registering on sam.gov. For those of you that are familiar, sam.gov, the registration process takes about 2 hours for grantees, or if you want to get a grant. So we're going to try and put that under a separate webinar. But long story short is, you want to prepare to register for sam.gov, which means we must make sure you're registered within the state, for example, the state of Hawaii. And we want to make sure that you have your DUNS number, which is a numerical physical locator of where your business resides within the state of Hawaii. We want to make sure that you, I think Mary talked about this, have your NAICS codes, because that will be required within the sam.gov system. And then of course, in order for you to get the grant funds dispersed to you, you have to make sure that you have all of your EFT information there. So I'm going to go really quickly over the slides, but know that you'll get this. This is kind of like a process real quick process on how to get registered to sam.gov. You'll notice that I have the links on some of these screenshots. Again, just as a reminder, you should be looking for .gov websites. The only website that you probably won't see .gov is this one, which is Dun & Bradstreet. So before I move off this slide, I want to make sure everybody understands. Dun & Bradstreet is a for-profit company. But to get the DUNS number from Dun & Bradstreet is of no cost to you. They will sell you products or services that make you think you need to pay for the DUNS number, but let me tell you now, it is for free. You do not need to buy any product or service with Dun & Bradstreet. DUNS numbers are free. So moving forward really quickly, you want to make sure you get your NAICS codes, right? So here is the website. Notice it is a .gov website. So you can take a look to make sure you have the appropriate NAICS codes that is reflective of your entity. And then of course you want to make sure that you get your EFT information from the bank. Here's a quick screenshot of what sam.gov will look like. If it doesn't look like this, you're probably not on the site that you should be. Again, always look for sam.gov. Registering for sam.gov is free. You will be asked to set up to create a login. I can talk about that further at the second webinar. Long story short, always look to 2 hours. Set aside 2 hours for those of you that did not register in sam.gov yet. What I want to make sure everybody understands is that when you do register for sam.gov, you want to make sure to tell sam.gov, or put it this way, you want to tell SBA that you are registering under sam.gov because you want to apply for the grant. So just use this screenshot, make sure you click that button on the bottom that says, I only want to apply for federal assistance opportunities like grants. Okay. At the end of when you submit the sam.gov registration, unfortunately, you're not done yet. So here's a link. What you need to do is submit to the Federal Service Desk, which are the folks that manage the sam.gov system, that you have identified, your eligible entity has identified the person that is going to be managing the sam.gov system. So there are templates that are available. I've included the link here. What you want to do is fill out for the company who is going to be the person that is going to be responsible for maintaining sam.gov. So once you submit that to Federal Service Desk and you get your entity approved, then you will be fully registered on sam.gov. This process, I used to say, took 7 to 10 days. Now I'm being told it takes about 2 weeks. So put some time away so that you can go through this process, which I'm told now takes about 2 weeks. You always want to check, right? So if you guys have any questions, let me know, but you can always check the status of sam.gov. It will tell you where you are in the process. It takes a little bit of time, again, 2 weeks. Okay, I think I'm done. So yeah, sorry folks, I'm really done. I'm done.
Thank you, Dana. As you can tell, for those of you who are interested in the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, the reason we invited Dana on here today is to let you understand what needs to happen before the application even opens, before you can think about applying. And this information is really helpful for you because as a business, some of you may be deciding, what is right for me? Is it the Shutter Venue Operators Grant or is it the Paycheck Protection Program? And so now you'll have information about both of those programs as you're making your decision. Luckily for all of our businesses who are interested in the Paycheck Protection Program, we have Sean Cayley with us today. Sean is the Chief Operations Officer with Hawaii Government Employees Federal Credit Union. They're a local CDFI who have been working in both the first draw and second draw Paycheck Protection Program loans. And Sean's here to tell you a little bit more about what that process looks like. You can apply with KGEFCU or other local lenders, and we do have a list of those lenders on our Hawaii Forward website. But Sean, thanks for joining us, and could you walk us through the process of it?
Sure, thank you, Diana. And also, I just want to give kudos to Mary and Dana for being able to keep all of these programs straight. There's so much information and it changes so much. And they are, even for us lenders, they are a great resource for us to to be able to call and straighten us out whenever we have questions. So let me start sharing my screen here. All right, I just wanted to give some tips for everybody that might be interested in applying for a PPP loan. I realize that a lot of businesses have been struggling lately and looking for ways that they can get funding or anything to help their business. That now that things have gone on a little bit longer than I think a lot of people expected at first, and a lot of businesses when PPP first came out might have been thinking that they could get through this, that this might just be some sort of a temporary blip, and things might get back to normal and their business would start operating. And clearly that hasn't happened the way that many of us hoped. And so don't be ashamed if you didn't pay attention to PPP the first time and didn't apply, and or if you got a loan the first time and you find that it's not enough, please contact your lender and see how we might be able to help you with this. So applying for the PPP loan program is really there's not a lot to it. It's a fairly simple program. And as far as tips that I can give you, I think the first one would be go to a lender that knows you, when practical, of course. Because whenever you go to somebody new, we're going to have to verify your business. We're going to have to ask for additional documentation to make sure that you are authorized to act on behalf of your business. And not that it isn't possible, it's definitely possible, but if you've already got that relationship with somebody that knows you and has an account with you, it's going to be so much easier and quicker for you to get that loan. Now, if that's not possible, if the lender isn't able to take PPP applications, or maybe their queue is so backed up that it might be a while for them to get to you, then of course go look for another lender, see somebody else who might be able to help you out. The second thing, if you have a second draw, make sure you confirm that you did have that 25% reduction in revenue before you apply. Take a look at your revenue from 2019, and you can break it down by quarter and make sure that you have a quarter in 2020 where you experienced that 25%. Or alternatively, you could just take 2019 overall and compare it against 2020 overall, and if there was a 25% reduction in revenue, then you are eligible for the second draw. The third tip is make sure you read the application carefully. There are a number of questions on that application that you have to answer to confirm your eligibility for PPP through the SBA. And some people get hung up by that because they just go through and they answer yes to everything or no to everything. And there's a couple of questions in there where it's a little bit different than you might expect. So make sure you read each one carefully and accurately attest to whether or not you have 300 employees or less, or all of your employees are U.S. residents. That's one that gets people a lot. And then, of course, have your documents ready once you've applied. That's just going to make things faster, because once you send your application in, you're going to be put into a queue, and the lender that you go to is going to have dozens, if not hundreds, of these applications. And so once they get to you, if you don't have your documents ready, then it kind of puts you back at the end of the line again, because they're just going to move on to the next one that's ready. So some common documents just to help you think about what you might need to be coming into the application with. You're going to want your tax documents. So if you are a sole proprietor, then you're going to get your Schedule C out of your federal tax return, 1099s if you're an independent contractor, if you have some of those too. Partnerships might be a K-1 or a nonprofit organization, a Form 990. These are just your tax forms. The other thing that you're definitely going to want to have is your quarterly or your annual wage reports, and that's how we're going to determine what your average payroll was. So these are going to be important documents for us to be able to figure out your eligible loan amount. And then, of course, other benefit information, because you can add in things like employer contributions to group health plans or retirement plans and things like that. So make sure you have that available. This one might seem a little rudimentary, but it's amazing how many of our applications get rejected by the SBA because we either when we were helping somebody fill it out, we made a mistake on it, or the borrower made a mistake on it. And so I think it's worth at least pointing out here that when you're filling out the application, make sure that you're careful to fill in all the information correctly. Your NAICS code is a 6-digit code. A lot of times people might put some other code in there, like a 4-digit code, or maybe their tax ID number. So make sure that you are putting the proper NAICS code there. Your business legal name, this gets people hung up a lot, especially sole proprietors, because if you are a sole proprietor and you have and you don't have a separate entity formed like a corporation or an LLC, you are the legal name for that business. The business is you. So if I was Sean Cayley and I had Sean's Plumbing on the side as a sole proprietor, the business legal name is Sean Cayley, and that gets a lot of people hung up. And so the business TIN would in all likelihood be your social security number. And then also at the bottom here, you see the applicant ownership information, where you list all owners with 20% or more ownership in the applicant. A lot of people will put the business there also, and that should actually be the people that own the business. And so sometimes if we don't catch that and we submit that to the SBA, it'll get rejected, and then we have to start all over again. So taking the time to make sure that you fill out the application correctly is going to help you in the long run, and it'll make it go a lot more quickly and a lot more smoothly. All right. And I think that's pretty much, from an application standpoint, those are the key points. Make sure you come in with the documentation, fill out your application properly, go to a lender that knows you if you can, and then that'll really get you in there, and you'll be able to get that PPP loan fairly quickly, I would think. Now, I know a lot of people, when you get a PPP loan, the most pressing thing on their mind is this loan going to be forgiven? Because as much as we would like to get a loan to help us with our businesses, many people would much rather have a loan that they don't have to pay back to help them with their businesses. And so we get a lot of questions about this, and so as soon as you get the loan, it's important to start thinking about forgiveness. And that's why I'm including some forgiveness tips in here, and that'll help you get to the point where we can get that loan forgiven, and hopefully you don't have to pay it back. So the first thing when you're thinking about forgiveness is to know what your covered period is. And I know Mary was talking about the covered period in the beginning of this, and she was talking about how you have a choice. You can go anywhere between 8 and 24 weeks from the time that you get your loan. And that covered period, it starts on the day that you get the money. So whatever day that the lender puts the money in your account or hands you a check, then that's day one of your covered period. And the clock starts right then. So from that day up to 24 weeks from then is when you want to use the money in the appropriate fashion. And so that's number 2 there. You want to use the funds appropriately and keep good records so that you can make sure that the money is eligible for forgiveness. You don't want to have spent it on the wrong thing and then go back afterwards and realize it's too late. The next thing is, just one thing to remember is that the way that the legislation is written, providing accurate forgiveness calculation is the responsibility of the borrower. So the lenders will look at your calculations, they will look at your forgiveness application, but ultimately we're taking what was attested to by the borrower, and you are saying that this is what you've calculated and this is the amount that you're eligible for forgiveness. And to various degrees we will be looking at that and verifying that it's correct, but ultimately it's up to you to make sure that happens. So make sure you ask your lender for a forgiveness calculator. There's a lot of tools out there. I know our forgiveness application has a calculator built into it. Each lender is a little bit different, but they should all have something to help you to be able to put all of your expenses into a tool that will calculate the eligible amount for your forgiveness. Another thing to keep in mind when you are thinking about forgiveness is what type of application are you using for your business? And the amount of your loan is really going to determine the extent to which you have to provide information and provide a thorough, more complete application for the lender. I guess suppose technically all applications should be complete, but each application is a little bit more involved. So the Form 3508, which is the full application, is very involved. There's many pages, and it's a bit of a process to get through that one. But most people that are applying for a PPP loan are going to fall in this first bucket, which is loans of $150,000 or less. And so when you're applying for forgiveness in that category, you are responsible for maintaining your payroll and expense records. You want to make sure that you keep that in case the SBA ever comes back to you and asks for that, because they will audit a sample of these applications and these loans. But you don't necessarily have to submit that to your lender. You just have to tell your lender that you have it and that you've kept track and you've calculated your forgiveness, and this is the figures that you've come up with. Now, your lender may ask for some information or some documentation to verify what you've said in your application, but you don't necessarily have to submit all of your records when you apply. And that's a great thing for most of us, to be able to not have to do that. Now, for loans over $150,000 that meet the wage and FTE requirements, FTE is full-time equivalent employees. So as long as you maintained your employee base, you didn't have layoffs over a certain percentage, and you met the wage requirements, then you can use the Form 3508 Easy, and you do have to submit your payroll and expense records, but hopefully, as the case with all of these, you have maintained them, and that's one of the things that you need to make sure you're doing, maintaining all those records throughout the time that you have your loan. And then everybody else is going to have to submit the full application with their records, along with a PPP Schedule A and documentation supporting your employee count. So again, it's a little bit more involved, and hopefully there's not too many businesses that have to go through that process. But if you think that you are going to fall into that category, then just talk to your lender. And it's probably good to get on it early rather than waiting until the end of your 24-week period. Talk to your lender right away and get some advice on how you can maintain the right documents and what documents that you're going to be needing to provide to them at the end. I put this on here because this is, I think, a great resource for everybody. The Department of Treasury website, treasury.gov, they have a page that's specific to the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program. This is where all the rules are. This is where all the frequently asked questions and forms and everything is on here. So if you're the type of person that likes to do the research yourself, you can go here and you can probably get the answer to any question that you might have. So this is definitely a great resource for you. Treasury.gov. And that's it. I wanted to keep it short. I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, but of course I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Sean, I'm so glad that you spent some time covering the forgiveness aspect, because I think that's really a critical part of choosing to take the Paycheck Protection Program loan, is thinking about forgiveness from the front end. I know many of our local businesses have concerns about taking debt right now, and the idea of a forgivable loan is only useful if it is forgiven. So thinking about that from day one is very important. So thanks for covering that. We have about 15 minutes to do a Q&A with all of our local experts here. So if you have questions, please start sharing them through the Q&A chat, and we can advance them to the appropriate person on our panel. We'd love to get through as many of them as we can today. And those that we don't cover, I will keep a record of, and we will get back to you with the answers. So even if we don't get to your specific question today, we will get back to you with a response. Just to kick it off, one question I know that has come in to us personally while others are entering their questions. For newer businesses who are interested in the Paycheck Protection Program, could one of you please cover what date they would have to be in business and how they would calculate the amount that they're eligible to receive?
So if we're looking at the date, we're looking at the February 15, 2020. They have to be in business prior to that to be eligible for PPP. And if you want the calculation, I could tell you, but probably Sean maybe should tell you that, since they're going to be the ones taking on. So Sean?
Yeah, sure. So if you weren't in operation for all of 2019, then what we would do is we would take your first 2 months of 2020, so January and February, we would use the information from those 2 months and use that to determine your average payroll for loan eligibility.
We did have an interesting question come in about the shuttered venue operators grant. And again, we'll preface this, as Dana has already, with this is based on the information we have now. The application is not live yet. But Dana, one of the questions has come in: do you have to have employees for your organization to receive the shuttered venue operators grant? This particular organization is an all volunteer organization that hires contractors but does not directly have employees.
Okay, so if I understand, so sorry, it's a little bit glitchy. Sounds like the business doesn't have employees, they're all volunteers, and they need, if I understand, they do independent contractors. Okay. My understanding is yes, but it would depend on what the proceeds would cover, but yes, as long as they have independent contractors, yes. And then there was that caveat in the act about a maximum amount, which was 100,000. So you would be capped at the 100,000, which is very similar to I think the PPP, right? There was a cap on that.
So is it they have, but Diana, do they have volunteers or they have actually independent contractors? Because I think we're looking at a difference. If you just have people that are volunteering as opposed to, okay, I 1099 and I use the independent contractor, for maybe if they clarify that.
I think for this particular one, we'll get more of those details and then respond to this individual question separately after the webinar.
Yep, you can give us an email and then we'll delve into the weeds.
One question that has come up a couple of times, and I just want to make sure everybody understands. I know we've covered this briefly earlier, but if someone is interested in the shuttered venue operators grant, can you cover what their options are for PPP? Again, you could have received the first draw of PPP, but you cannot receive a second draw, is my understanding. But can you talk a little bit about that, what someone might be considering when deciding between those two programs?
Okay, so when you're saying first draw, yeah, I look at the first draw as when it started this year. We're not talking about, if you just received the first draw this year, you won't qualify to get one for SVOG. But if prior to the December 27th of last year, you got one, no problem. You could have gotten one when it first came out last year, as long as you haven't received one since the 27th of 2020. If you get it after that date, then you don't qualify for the SVOG. Yeah, right on that slide.
Which you all will have after this one. I will give it to Diana at the end of the presentation.
So Mary and Dana, if I might ask a question then, if there is a business out there that is considering whether or not they should apply for the SVOG or the PPP, do you have any guidance for them?
I usually tell, so this is a tricky question because I always tell folks, you know, every business is different. So it would really depend. So my quick one is, if you meet the 60-40 split, then you know you qualify for 100% forgivable. So that's where we start getting equal, right? So if you can meet the PPP 60-40 split, then you know that's all forgivable. The grant is not something you have to pay back as well. So we delve into the weeds by saying, okay, so what costs are eligible under the PPP? And then as compared to what are the eligibility grant funds that you can get based on the 6 multiplier. So that's where the trigger comes into effect, is what does this company look like in terms of PPP eligibility versus what does it look like for the SVOG? But if we're assuming they can both qualify, then it's about, okay, do you meet the 60-40 split? Then we can start talking about the PPP. If you don't meet the 60-40 split, but you qualify as an eligible applicant, then I'm talking about, okay, let's talk about the SBOG. But the devil is in the details,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
and then, yeah, and I think what you have to look at too, besides the eligible applicants, you got to determine what do you think you're going to get more for. Let's say, like Dana said, you meet both of them. Okay, so the multiplier of 6, is that going to get you more money for it? But also what Dana mentioned at the end, once you get your PPP and you get your forgiven, you pretty much just hold on to your documents. You're done with SBA. But for the grant, you're going to have all those documents that you're going to have to keep up with. They're probably going to audit them because they probably will be a larger amount and it's a grant. So they're going to want more details on it. You're going to have more record keeping with it. You're going to have to register in sam.gov. That's not a friendly system. It's going to be a lot more involved. So sometimes it's just, how much do I want the government in my life to keep up with this? Do I want to get my money, get out, get my forgiveness and gone? Or do I want for the next 4 to 5 years them tracking me down, asking me for all this documentation to verify that I use these appropriately as well? So I think you have to, weigh that as well. If you think I'm getting similar dollar amounts, maybe PPP is for me. But if you think I'm going to get way more and I don't mind the monitoring because I'm going to use it appropriately, you look at that. Now, Dana and I are looking to come up with a workshop just like that, Sean, to kind of get people to weigh that option out, because I know they're thinking, oh, PPP is here now. I don't know when the shuttered venue grant is going to come out. I need to get the funding, because if you get turned down for PPP, then you can apply, but you can't do both. I hope that helps some.
Yes, you cannot apply for both simultaneously, I should say.
Yeah.
One of the other questions that we had is when the simple forgiveness application will be available for PPP.
So it almost sounded like Sean said he had a copy of it, but I was like, I didn't think
Yeah, I
we
did
had.
not mean to imply that.
I was like, what? No, we don't have a date as of yet. But like you said, you can gather the information. If you know you have under that 150, keep that documentation. So once that form does come out, that application form does come out, the lender will be able to give it to you to self-certify on that. Unless Sean secretly has something we don't have and he's hiding from all of us.
I wish I did, because people are calling me every day for it.
One of the questions, and I think we can get into this to answer a few of the questions I've seen come in, is a little bit more about who is eligible to receive the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant. Dana, I know you had a great slide on that. Maybe we could pull that up and go through those again. Specifically, we had a question about whether local activity and tour operators qualify. I know some of our restaurants have asked, hey, we have live nightly music, do we qualify? And so I think if you could show us that list again and just go over that one more time with the group.
So I think I heard, do restaurants qualify? So what I want to say, and I'm gonna give this off of the FAQs that SBA posted as of January 27th. So things may have changed, things may change today, but if we're talking about restaurants, I'm going to say no. Having said that, so if you are in fact a restaurant, and Mary can talk a little bit more, you might qualify for the 3.5 multiplier under the PPP. So here's a slide of the NAICS codes for 72. So hopefully you can see this, but for that person who asked the question, if you are in fact a restaurant and you can meet the 60-40 split, the 3.5 multiplier might be something you want to take a look at.
And Dana, this is a question that we had as well while you're on this slide. Can you tell everyone what the code, the acronym for the code stands for and what that is used for? The classification code.
Yeah, it's the North American Industry Classification Code. So it is a numerical describer of the products and or services that each business offers. So that is found under, and so I'm gonna flip real quick to the slide here. Again, folks, you guys will get this. You can find your NAICS code under the census.gov website. If you can take a look, it's in the link, but I would say just go Google and just go census.gov NAICS or NAICS code lookup. Again, always look for the .gov. But what you would do is you could do a keyword search on that left side on the dashboard, and then they will pull up the various NAICS codes that may be applicable to you based on the keyword you input.
One more question about PPP. Obviously, when you take the loan, we're hoping for forgiveness. But I think there was a question on if the loan was not forgiven, what's the percentage rate for the loan? Can you cover that?
1%. 1%.
Sean,
cheap.
we had a, go ahead, Mary. Were you going to say something else?
Oh, I said it was pretty cheap.
Sean, we had a question for you. Can you give a little bit more information for nonprofit organizations that want to apply for PPP? If there's anything specific that they need to do differently or fill out differently for the applicant ownership section of the application?
Yes, actually, on the applicant ownership section, because there aren't owners, that's a common question. I should have mentioned that one. The advice that we've gotten from the SBA is to put the organization's information on that line with 100% ownership. And I honestly don't know if that's because our system requires there to be an owner or if the SBA requires there to be an owner. But I know that when somebody applies with us, that's what we're advising them to do. And in terms of what to provide, basically it's your payroll documentation. So you would want to provide us with your quarterly or your annual wage reports, the 940 or the 941 reports, along with your federal form 990, which might have some of the information on there regarding the benefits that you paid. And that would allow us to calculate your eligible amount. And then, of course, we would have to, if we don't have a relationship with you already, then we might ask for some information to be able to establish a relationship, like your bylaws or meeting minutes or something along those lines.
Thank you, Sean. We do have a few other questions that have come in, but what I'd like to do, since we're nearing 3:30, is to collect the list of those questions. We will review with SBA and the rest of the team here and get back to you with all of those answers. But before we end for today, if Mary, Sean, Dana, Mark, if any of you have any closing thoughts you'd like to share, plugs for future webinars like you mentioned or anything like that, the stage is yours before we close out.
Okay, I'll go. Thanks everybody for listening to us drone on and on and on. So it's one thing about federal government is that there's a lot of paperwork. So hopefully this is not a too difficult process, but it is in fact a process. But like Mary said, feel free to reach out. There are providers out there, Mary kind of talked about them, that can help assist you put that package together. Even out there on Kauai, she did that plug, right? SBDC Kauai, reach out to them.
So I think Robbie from Robbie Melton's on listening today from the Kauai SBDC. So if you reach out to Robbie, maybe she can go to the chat and type in some information on how to get in touch with her over there. And then you guys can go sit down with Robbie if you have some more questions and you want to do that one-on-one.
I would just
All
thank you
informed.
again for your time today, and just really great information. So grateful to all of you. We do have a lot of things on the horizon, Diana, but the only thing we have scheduled at this point is on February 23rd. We have a federal legislative outlook with Mel Jennings from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce at 11 a.m. You can find more information about that on our website, kawaichamber.org.
Mark, can you put the link in the chat for everyone? And then I'll add it too as well when we send out the communication about this.
And I just wanted to add that I know a lot of people are still struggling and looking for assistance, and this was specifically geared towards PPP and the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, but I encourage anybody, even if you don't think you're eligible for either of those programs, to contact your financial institution or your lender and just talk to them and see what we might be able to do. Give us a call, give your own financial institution a call, and at least start the conversation.
Yeah, I was saying what Sean said is appropriate. I've gotten a few calls that people have starting to do better, and their business, they pivoted, so their business is growing a little bit more, and they are looking for new funding. So I do try to tell them to talk to their lenders, whoever that may be. And he's right. We always tell them to go to the bank or the credit union that you have a relationship with, because they're going to know you best. So if you have one of those businesses that are growing and programs we talked about today are probably not for you, go see Sean or whoever you bank with.
Thank you again to everyone who participated. We will reach out to all of our attendees with the deck, with the links that we've discussed, but please feel free to reach out to us if you do have questions. If we can't answer them ourselves, I will consult with Mary, Sean, or Dana and get you those answers. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Bye.